Cool. So, hello everyone. This is What She Thinks First podcast. The title of our segment today is Let's Talk Race. I'm your moderator, Maria, and today we have Jasmine, Jakima, and Sky joining us. And so, we're going to start off with talking about a couple problems that we came up with and what we really want to talk about. And then as our segment ends, we'll talk about our causes for those problems and we'll conclude with our solutions. So, how are you guys feeling today? Are you guys ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it.
Ready to get this going?
Yes. So, one of our first problems that we as a group talked about was generational racism and our own individual opinions and situations that we've been in general racism. And does anyone want to share their experience first, and we can go on from there?
Well, yeah, I can go first. Generational racism. Is a big thing for the African American community. Though from back then to now, we have so many different looks at it and words, and colorism is a really big thing. Me being the light-skinned girl, a lot of people might feel like I have an advantage over a dark-skinned female or a dark-skinned male. So luckily, I've had family that haven't put the color into the equation, but I still have to walk out into the world and deal with other people, and other ethnicities and other people that feel like, she might have a little bit of an advantage over somebody else. But it's definitely a serious thing, I think, in every culture right now.
Mm-hmm. And it's like very true what you're speaking in terms of like your own position. And that's why I really wanted to point out, like, all of us are going to have our own individual situations and circumstances, because when talking about generational racism, it definitely is going to vary culture by culture. Something that I specifically wanted to bring up in terms of generational racism is within my culture, in the Hispanic culture, generational racism is definitely a huge thing, and it doesn't necessarily just involve like being racist towards other communities like the Black community or any other community, but also within our own. And so I think it's just super important to really bring up the fact that generational racism is kind of like a cycle where we pass down these little comments, these little nicknames,
Definitely the nicknames.
Nicknames, the ideas, and all stuff like that, where we all kind of perceive it as like, oh, ha ha ha, he, but it's really wrong. And it just, I feel like it's something that you kind of just, when you pick up on it, you shouldn't be ashamed to speak out and say something about that,
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part too, is like speaking out, especially with your family. And like you said, it's a cycle. And I think our generation really I feel like our generation believes education is really an important thing in life and just to do anything pretty much. But it's interesting to see how the cycle goes. And then like the kids go off to college and learn more and get educated, not so ignorant. And then they come back for holidays, let's say, and their opinions, and but it is hard to have that confidence to go against your family too.
Right.
Yeah, I know like with my family, like we kind of like talked about our experiences before this and stuff. And for me, I am I'm first generation. So my parents both went from their countries. My dad's Salvadorian, my mom is Mexican, and they came to the United States. So they came with a lot of like cultures that happen in the native land kind of there, and we're kind of like brought up here with those ideals still there. So there was definitely a lot of like Maria, you mentioned like a lot of undercover, a lot of stuff where it's like it's just a joke, but it's actually
that
not
joke.
funny.
Yeah.
Right. But you can't say anything because you're like, my elders, I can't say anything. Respect is huge. If you say anything proving them wrong, you are
Because then that's
completely
disrespect.
Yeah.
how dare you have the audacity to say I'm wrong, even though you're right and I'm wrong, you know?
Yes,
But
definitely.
it's been like really cool because when this like a lot of these like this current BLM movement, and it was just like every single city, and it was in here in Vallejo as well and stuff, and it literally like saw protests, heard it across like my house. Like it was so cool to see. And then it started conversations with my family, and we all kind of came together and we're like, you know what? Yeah, we're all going to agree. My parents included, we're like, yeah, we're not going to stand for that anymore. And we're going to change. And it's important. And, you know, we're standing for each other, you know, especially as minorities, like us Latinos and Hispanics need to stand with like our Black brothers and sisters, you know, like we got to fight it together. And that's the only way it's going to happen. But yeah, it's wild. And it's just like, for me, I know like my situation is something that's not very common, but hopefully it can become more common of like family having hard situations, be like, you know what, actually this is a bigger picture here, and it's not about my ego, but it's about the care for other people.
Right. I really love that you bring that up, because I feel like there's this like hidden like anti-Black like the thing going on with like the Hispanic culture. And I like to bring that up a lot because I know that there's definitely this thing where we talk about how you know, like you kind of really can't be racist if you're like a minority or a person of color. But this is really great that, you know, Jasmine brought this up, because this goes into our next problem, which is colorism, which Jakima brought up earlier. It's this whole idea of like making people of darker complexity like even a more minority, you know, when in reality we're really all in this together. Like, you know, to just be very blunt, I guess you can say, like racism is towards anyone that's a person of color. Like, you know what I'm saying? So why even add into that? Why add into that system, into that cycle, when it's hurting you? So why do you want to do the same to other people? You know what I'm saying?
No, I definitely get that. And, you know, the hardest part is for, you know, with the African-American cultures, we had a lot of our cultures taken away from us. So we kind of take from what they made us to kind of be, you know what I'm saying? And that's where colorism like started with, you know, the darker complexion being in the field, the lighter complexion being in the house and being the maids and the workers and a lot of that. And that made the rift between, you know, so many African Americans in the beginning. And it just, you know, that cycle just came and literally hit every generation. But that colorism is, I mean, I don't like for me to actually feel it and see it and know that, you know, it's going on. But, you know, you always have to step out in the world and deal with somebody who will, you know, push your buttons a little bit. And that's the difficult part on like trying to, you know, just educate myself more and educate the people around me more, so that I'm not feeling out of touch. They're not feeling out of touch, you know, and it's, we can kind of, like you say, come together. Because once you go from the African Americans, they're going to the Latinos, and then they're going to, you know, the Asians. So you have to, I definitely do think that that's important, because at the end of the day, I feel like we're all minorities for real. Even white people, you guys weren't here, you know, when, you know, everybody else, and it just seemed like all of us, we're known to be the melting pot. America is known to be that, but then now they're seeing all these rifts between us. So I think that that's, you know, that's that generational, that colorism, it just all ties in together, like you said. It's definitely something that as America, we all kind of got to work on, is to not look at, you know, African American and say, ooh, you know, not look at a Hispanic and say, oh my God. We have to, you know, keep that respect between each other.
Definitely, for sure. I wanted to point out something specific that Jakima said, which was that she herself mentioned that she doesn't really like feeling that colorism is kind of like this thing, but it's just the simple fact that she acknowledges it. And I feel like that's a really big thing, because a lot of people don't really believe in like colorism, don't really believe in white privilege. And I've spoken a lot in this course about white privilege because I feel really strongly about it, because I feel like not a lot of people are really giving it the focus that it truly needs. And so I think that it's important. And I just am really glad that you pointed out the fact that you don't like that, you know, the colorism is a thing, but you acknowledge it. And that's actually what really matters, though. The fact that you just are aware and that you know that this is a problem.
Yeah, and I just hope that, you know, once people are aware, then that's when we can, you know, say, you know, be honest with ourselves and say, ooh, you know, I shouldn't have said that. Let me check myself. And see, that's where, you know, this knowledge that we come into in college is that we learn to check ourselves and check what we have learned over these years through these different generations and our grandparents and all these things. And that's one thing, you know, I feel like we have to do is we have to check ourselves, all of us.
Going off of the this whole concept and like the fact of white privilege, I'm like, if you look at like us as a group, let's say, it's the problems in this country is that if you compare, like, let's say me and Jakima both steal something, like I have the privilege of knowing I'm probably not going to have a gun drawn on me. I'm probably not going to get arrested. And it's even within my family. My siblings are darker complected than me. We're all Hispanic, but my siblings are darker complected. And it'd be the same thing with me and my little sister. Even though same last name, family, it doesn't matter. It's because of how I look. And anyone that tries to tell me, oh, I don't have white privilege, you know, I grew up poor, but that's not what that means. It doesn't mean you didn't have a hard life. It just means if you're put in the same situation as somebody who's not as light as you, you have the privilege of knowing you're gonna get better off. Like that's just how it works. So once I like learned about that, and I learned about that really young, I think my high school history teacher like brought that up, and she was a Hispanic woman. I was like, okay, yeah, I agree. I totally understand what you're saying.
Right, you didn't fight it off.
No.
Yeah, because you have so many people that's like, well, we go through things too. I mean, I get that. I don't think that nobody in this world has ever had hardship, ever. What I do know is that, say if, you know, one of us calls the police, who would the police come to first? You know, they might not know what we automatically look like, but through our voice, through how we act, how we do things, that's how they're going to differentiate. And that's, you know, that's a really good example of white privilege, which is what I'm happy they actually came up with a name for it, because I had no idea. Like, I was like, oh yeah, okay, like that. And they just don't like to hear the word privilege. Like, come on now, you guys, this has been for years. Like, let's just deal with it, eat it, get over it, you know?
Definitely. And so one of our next problems that we also mentioned was social media and, you know, the whole idea of fake news, which our president likes to call it. So I think
popularized it, you know.
Yes, popularized the term
keyword.
So I think it's important also in this topic because a lot of our news is coming from social media, especially with this, you know, our younger generation. It's easier, more accessible, but it's very important to mention that it can be a problem and it can fuel certain things, especially during this election. And so I'm not sure if anyone wants to go ahead and jump right in with that, because I mean, I know I have some stuff to say, but
yeah, if I can share a statistic real quick.
Definitely.
I was reading on the Los Angeles Times, and it was talking about false information and just a statistic against it. And when it said, researchers have found that falsehoods are 70% more likely to be retweeted than the truth. And recent studies also show that age is the strongest predictor of engagement with fake news. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Facebook users over 65 shared nearly 7 times as many articles from fake news sites as young users. So old
Right.
age tends to predict more fake news being circulated
Right.
more than anything else. But 70% more likely to be retweeted than the truth. That's crazy.
No,
Wow.
really.
More than half. More
Yes,
than
because
half.
you would
Right.
think that our
Like,
elders,
Mhm.
are getting reliable news sources because, right? Like they're elders. Like you would think an adult would get their information and research it, but it's actually really interesting that elderly folks are the ones that are sharing the fake news more than
Mhm.
Because they're very biased. They're very stuck in their ways. They're very stuck in what they feel, how this world is going, or, old technology's killing everything. And, you have
Yeah.
so many different things. But like you said, they're the leading ones doing it. I mean, they're not hating technology that much, but,
mhm.
it may be because, they come from a time of propaganda, real
Yeah.
serious
oh yeah.
propaganda. And that could be a
Mhm.
whole nother situation, is that's just what
Mhm.
what their minds are used to in that stage of like elections and, so many things going on.
Right.
So that can definitely be a situation too.
I was gonna say that like when they like if we're talking 65 and older, that age range, when media came out, like they didn't have internet, they didn't have
Right.
like they had channel
Mm.
1, maybe 2 news channels. So they just knew, they thought what they are telling me is like what I
Yeah.
read in the newspaper. So I think
Mhm.
they don't, and it's funny because when the internet came out and they say like, you believe everything you read on the internet? I'm like, do you?
Right.
like
Yeah.
you
That's so
do.
funny.
That's
It's
true
just,
though.
but I think that is a huge, like, we have to think about us. We grew up in, well, let me Google this really fast. And
Yeah.
it brings you up all these different articles, 10 of them saying different things. Where for
Right.
them, they're like, CNN said it, that's it. Fox News, that's it. Like, that's who I'm trusting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Or
so
what if,
biased. Like,
right. Or what about those that post it just reading the title? They don't even read what's in it. They
no,
just
they
read the
don't read
title and they're like,
anything
yes,
else.
absolutely. And you're like, you didn't even read the actual article, did you?
Those article
My
titles
grandma.
are,
They're good. Those journalists know how to do it.
well, yes, they do. Yes, they
They're doing their
definitely
job
do.
right.
No, but so just to kind of close off our segment here and move on to the causes of these problems, which we're already discussing, which is the way that journalism works, the way
Mhm.
that these people are accustomed to receiving their news information. And just to kind of jump back to our generational racism starter and a cause for that. And I feel like a really big thing that we pointed out in one of our own separate discussions was that we aren't really getting the full scope of history. And I remember, I don't know if you guys remember me asking you guys, how many of us had teachers of color teaching our
Mhm.
history? And
Right.
we all kind of, took a step back and we were like,
Yeah.
hold up, like actually it's very rare that I've had a history teacher that was a person of color. And how that could be a really a player in this generational racism apart
Yeah.
from our family and apart from our peers.
Yeah, because I feel like, imagine like what trying to become a history teacher and like having to read all this, crazy stuff that could happen. That's probably what diverged so many people of color from becoming history teachers, because it was probably like, how can I teach this? Like,
Right.
this is pro-American. This is not for any minorities, even though, we're supposed to be the melting pot. It's
Right.
not told from anybody else's story but white America.
And there's so much history that you're not getting in high school. Like, history was one of my favorite subjects. It still is. So when I went to college, I took my first semester, I took a regular history, and then I took women's history. And I was like, oh, how much can they really fit in a semester? We couldn't even fit all of it.
Right.
And
That was one of
and
my
then I
favorites
took
too.
African American history, but there was like 4 different courses. I only took the one,
Wow.
and it was like all this, and he even said, I can't even get through all this in a semester, you guys, so we're gonna be moving quick. I'm like, we never knew about any of this.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, the stuff you learn
Right.
about after high school blows your mind.
And I mean, I guess it can be maybe because of curriculum and what can and can't be said in high school. I'm not
Oh,
sure
because you
if
know
they're
them boards are serious about that. They are
yeah,
going in
yeah.
on the
So there
curriculum.
definitely can be some reasoning as to why we're not getting this full truth. But I feel like, you
Right.
know, these, like, our children are going to be our future. I'm the future.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so for me to be able to make these decisions and make a world a better place, I should be given all of my resources, all of the details to be able to, you know, like I shouldn't have to rely on my peers because let's say,
Yeah.
what if my parents are racist? Then what? You know what I'm saying? If I'm supposed to get my education from somewhere else, from a different, you know, source, how am I able to, you know, like distinguish? And I'm not at all trying to justify racism because it is completely wrong. When you're grown, you're able to make your own decisions and your
Hmm.
own
Yeah.
judgment. I'm just saying though, I feel like it's very lenient to, you know, if you're getting all this pro-American history, it's like, how are you
Mhm.
really supposed to know what happened unless you go out yourself in college and seek it?
Yeah. It's
That
true.
goes into the generational too, because you hear everything from your family, from, you know, elders, you
Yeah.
respect. College isn't for anyone. You decide not to go to college. I mean, where
Mhm.
else are you actually going to learn and hear about some of this stuff? Like, I
Mhm.
know in my life I would have never learned about some of the things I
Mhm.
learned about except in those courses. So, it, like you said, it's no excuse or anything for, you know, but I totally see your point on that. With education, you just get out of high school and you think that's just it. That's what it was.
Right.
Our whole history.
Jasmine, did you want to share that great article
The-
that we talked about?
Yeah, I was actually looking for like the exact quote that I was reading before. But so Trump, I guess like one of his big things for being reelected was education. So he said he would create a national commission to promote a pro-American curriculum that celebrates the truth about our nation's great history, which he said would encourage educators to teach students about the miracle of American history. And the reason for that was because that this was in the midst of like all of the riots, everything.
Right.
So that's just context. But he believed that uh, that the racial and he characterized demonstrations against racial injustice, which were the protests, as left-wing rioting and mayhem, and that are a direct result of decades of left-wing indoctrination in our schools, and it's gone too far. So that's his thought of what we were already getting taught, which, like we said, is barely anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's mostly been our own searching and what's on the internet.
And
Like that's how we're
accomplishments.
getting taught.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how we're teaching ourselves in like college education with professors that are focusing on specific topics.
Right.
Like that's how we're getting taught is
And they're able to say
after.
what they want to say with this being
Yeah,
college and not high
exactly.
school, and
Mm-hmm.
them having to
Mhm.
stick to like not saying, you know, what they are free to say. That's why I always tell people college is a whole nother life.
Yeah.
It
Right.
is not the same as, you know, high
Mhm.
school. And I'm not just saying when you pick your classes, you know, I'm saying
Right.
when you really walk into a classroom, it feels different. So, you know,
Yeah.
I just think that Trump quote is such a slap in the face to so many African Americans and
Very.
different minorities, because how dare you say like more American? I mean, how much more can we get?
Yeah.
You literally took
Really.
out things of that have happened in history just so that America would look good. So how much more
Mhm.
else like
Mhm.
can you guys do without like keep hurting the people that made this country, that built this country for
Yeah.
real?
Mhm.
So it's just like what, and why would he be talking about education?
Yeah.
Him like
Right.
really, you and I both know you stopped in like 6th grade. Stop lying. Like it just, the things he say is just like mind-boggling. Like how did this even happen?
No,
And
really.
to
though.
say great history, like
You've done some
I'm
really
just-
bad stuff. Yep. A lot of bad stuff has
I know.
happened. A lot
I
of
mean,
stuff.
I think I've brought up in another discussion we had, like saying how in Europe, like the Germans teach about
Mm.
the Holocaust, and they don't
Yeah.
say, "Oh, here's we'll learn about it for 1 or 2 weeks and then, our bad. Like, no, they teach it. And, like, we just know slavery happened. Like, from high school, slavery happened. Okay? Whips, that's it. But when you dive into it, it is so great history throws me off just a little bit in that quote.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's not that great.
To continue going on our causes of these things, when we brought up colorism, which was a really big topic for us, and one thing I really wanted to point out, what I feel like is really a big cause of colorism, is these social constructs that are being also passed down. And so they kind of tie in with generational racism, with the fact that we're only getting this really kind of pro-American history already, and all these social constructs that were, made back then. And this whole idea of like how the ideal person is a fair skin, and it kind of even goes into things like, have you guys ever heard anyone tell anyone else of like a person of color that they speak white? Oh, you're talking about a white person. When
I've been through that my whole life.
Yes. When you're like, that's no such thing. Just because you're speaking properly doesn't mean you're speaking white. And it's just certain things that are about this. And I feel like we just don't touch on them so often. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because that's one of those jokes. People say, "Oh, you talk white," and then they laugh.
Right.
It's not. It's never been a joke to me because I'm the one they're laughing at. But it was always like I guess, like, well, I'm gonna get the interview. You're not. It was always like, okay.
Right.
But I mean, like you said, those are things that have been passed down from generation to generation that they think is something okay to say, that they think, well, it's funny, and those are not funny things. So it definitely has to start at home for us to, start checking ourselves and other people around us.
So just before I close off our causes segment, do you guys have any other situations we want to talk about? I know that we already kind of mentioned the causes for social media, and reason being is that a lot of folks aren't just doing their own research, which can actually move us on to our solutions, some solutions that we ourselves came up with for these problems. And so I can go ahead and share what I feel is really important, especially nowadays during this political climate going on in our country, is I really want to stress that folks really need to fact check everything, especially because when we're talking about these infographics on Instagram, they can be great. They can be really great tools just to kind of get you started. You know what I'm saying? Get a good grip of what it is that we want to look into. But I just really want to stress to folks that, it can be tedious. It can be like time consuming and so on, but it's just important. It's really important to read beyond the headline of that article that you seen on Facebook that your aunt shared, or like it's all these other things, because you just have to be able to make, because the decisions that you're going to make are not just going to impact you, though. They're going to impact everyone around you, your community, your family, etc. And so I think it's just super important that one of these solutions to the problems that we have mentioned at the beginning of this podcast is just to really just do your research.
Yeah, and if people could be on social media all day, they can do the same thing on Google.
Yes.
I always say that. If you can pick that phone up and do that, you can read that too. So.
Right.
No excuse now. Honestly, like I know you say it honestly it could be not that time consuming though, because like during elections, there's like websites, fact-checking websites, or the fact checker in the debates. So there's no excuse for, especially our generation, like you can look up, you can find the truth.
And we know how.
Yeah. We know how. Exactly. And then also, go ahead, Jasmine.
No, I was going to say, one of my teachers always told us, they're like, never just rely on one news source. Fact check their news source. So like check at least 3 different types of news to kind of, he's like, and it's somewhere in the middle, the truth is. He's like,
Yeah.
not one is the end all be all truth,
Mhm.
but if you read enough and kind of get the broad scope, you'll
Right.
find
Yeah.
the truth somewhere in the middle of
Mhm.
that. So it's
Mhm.
always good to not rely just on CNN or just on MSNBC, like anything, but
Right.
saying, okay, you know what, let me check all these different ones, and then I'll probably get more of a feel of what actually is going on versus what they're all saying is like the truth, the end all be all, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
That's good advice.
And also, like, let's not be afraid to speak up. Let's not be afraid to question the information that we're getting. Like, it doesn't matter who it's from. If your friend is telling you something, it's okay to question it. It's okay
Mhm.
to look for more, because in
Mhm.
all honesty, that's how you're going to be able to make these just decisions, like Jasmine mentioned.
True.
You know what I'm saying? It's not going to be a direct line where you're going to just go from news outlet to news outlet and you're
Mhm.
this is the truth. You're just going to have to be able to make your own decisions, but at least you were able to make your own decisions from multiple things that you've seen and not just
Mhm.
one news outlet or this one news article.
Yeah.
Because it's okay to disagree with your family. We're not all
Yeah.
supposed
Yes.
to think the same thing. And that's the beauty of us also being in America too, is we don't have to all think the same thing. And that's the reason why we should take that extra step
Mm-hmm.
to research and make sure we know and we fact check that fact. And we do this because we have those rights to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mhm.
should definitely take advantage of that and, change it one day at a time.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right, you guys. Well, that was a really interesting topic. I loved being able to discuss this with you guys and get your input for sure. I'm hoping that everyone else who watches is also able to get a good takeaway from our opinions and our views. And
Mhm.
I just want to thank you guys for taking the time.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Yes, thank you. Have a good night, you guys.
You too. Bye.